You were on the floor at Press, a restaurant that I've been to many times.
Yes.
Tell me the worst story from being on the floor, or tell me a horror story about working on the floor at Press in Napa.
It was mostly good nights. You know, when I worked there, so when I first started at Press, I had just moved from New York City. And when I lived in New York City and worked as a som there, it's very European centric, right? Nobody drinks Napa wine in New York, or at least they didn't used to. So when I got to California, it was really, really overwhelming. And I will never forget, I'm just like any baby som, right? You're working with this like huge wine list with vintages going back to the 40s, 50s, 60s. And like you're thrown into the deep end of the ocean and expected to swim, right? So I'm like, all right, fake it till you make it, right? I'm an actress. I can do this, like, for sure, no problem. And it like goes pretty well for the first few weeks. And then I distinctly remember selling a bottle of wine, or at least talking about a bottle of wine to Tony Biaggi, who is a notable winemaker in Napa Valley, 100% winemaker, but he's also like been there in California for a long time. And I will never forget, he starts asking me a question about this wine, and I totally fake it. I don't even know what I said, but I totally fake it because I'm like, I don't know the actual answer to this. And he called me out on it, and he looks at me and he's like, he winks. He's like, actually, and I forget exactly what it is he said, but from that moment on, I was like, all right, well, note to self, number one, like, do your effing research. And number two, Tony Biaggi knows his shit. So do not ever try to fake it with Tony Biaggi.
I think in wine communication, I've seen that so many times. I know I've been caught in that too, where you're, especially early on when you don't know anything, you think you should know, so you just BS your way through it. But that's not a good look. It's not a good look.
It was a good lesson learned. It was a good person to learn it with, because like Tony, if you've ever met Tony, it's like to meet him is to love him, and he's just the most wonderful human being. And he did it in the most charming of ways. But it taught me as a som, like, it's better to just say, I don't know, but I will find the answer. And like from then on out, like that was sort of my MO. And, working with Kelly, working with Scott, like they were really supportive of like, yeah, if you don't know, like this is like a crazy amount of history that you're expected to know. So if like you don't know, then like someone has the answer. But also like how cool to be serving these wines to the people that know the valley. They were there with, they made them, they worked at these vineyards. So I mean, it was really cool at the same time as it was incredibly humbling.
We're with Amanda McCrossin, aka Som Vivant, across all social media. You've worked in a restaurant for a long time. You were a wine director. You've got probably the biggest wine TikTok account in the US, probably one of the biggest wine Instagram accounts. What do you think it is that's allowed you to connect and communicate wine effectively with people? Because it's something that a lot of the wine industry just has not figured out. So, and even wine drinkers don't even know sometimes what they really want.
It's my winning personality, obviously.
Yeah.
No. I don't know. I didn't grow up in a wine drinking house. Like I often joke that when people are like, what was your wine collection like growing up? Like our wine collection was literally a ski closet. Like it lived next to the washer and dryer. You walked in, it was like everyone's ski suits were there. I think there was like a shelf that my dad eventually built that had like Baileys and like probably like a bottle of Absolute, and then like whatever wine someone would gift us, and maybe like occasional bottle of like box wine. But like that was it. So like I didn't know wine growing up, and I always thought it was this sort of generational thing, like you had to be born into, in the way that you are born into wealth, that like your grandfather just passed down to you. So when I got to New York and I started talking to people about wine, because I was working in restaurants, I just had this feeling of like take a deep breath, like someone is here to guide you, but also like it was almost my responsibility to like take it and dissect it. And then the other part of it is my father, who I love so much, he's an engineer. And he like, I remember bringing math problems home from school to him, and he would like literally spend hours on these math problems, and he would like over dissect them. So to the point where I would then have to like distill all of this crazy information down into something that was understandable. And I think it kind of became my like superhuman skill, that I could take complex information and just like simplify it so that I understood it. So I think it was just this combination of like my ability to do that, and then this notion that like I didn't have wine growing up, so I know how it feels to feel like an idiot when you're talking about wine. So I don't know. I think it's just that combination. And then my background's in theater, so there's that added bonus.
Well, it's so funny because I think a lot of people in wine, first of all, people that are drinking wine don't want to ask the tough questions or don't want to look stupid. Mm-hmm. And also the wine industry has had a hard time kind of dumbing down information
Yeah.
in a way that they don't look so pretentious, but in a way to make it simple. I feel like you've found a pretty decent formula. You
I,
want to speak on that?
yeah, no, I think that's the problem. Inherently, people want to dumb down information and like, say what you want about the human race, but like they're not quite as dumb as people make them out to be. Like I think people want to be brought up. And so if you give them information that they can synthesize and contextualize, I think that's really the key. So making it relatable to their everyday life. Like you can tell someone that the champagne vineyards are super chalky and that, if you drink Chablis, like there's Cameroonian soil there. But it doesn't matter if you can't give them a reason to care. So I think that's to me is like the biggest problem that we have in the wine industry is that we're just throwing information at people that makes absolutely no sense in the context of their own lives and expecting them to not only remember it, but also apply it to something that they don't have any context for to begin with. So I think there's contextualization, and then there's a language barrier, which is also another whole thing, which we're going to talk about. We have a wine that, definitely requires some level of reading another language.
What is it that you think that you've seen in practice, being on the floor and through social media? I see you respond to almost all the comments. What is it that wine drinkers really want? What are they actually really looking for?
Value. They just, and it's not even value in that like they want cheap wines. They just don't want it. They want to feel like their money is well spent. I think it's like any sort of commerce good, right? I think people just want to make sure that they're not frivolously and stupidly spending money. So whether that's, connecting with the story, resonating with the people that make it, even finding ways to pair it with food, I think like that's what people want when they're drinking wine. It's not related necessarily to a price point. I think that we've seen trends ebb and flow in terms of how much people are spending on wine, but like what really hasn't changed is this idea that like people buy wine for the story. It's just a matter of like figuring out which story they're going to relate to.
Isn't it funny that people say they want value, they want they want to buy the best wine they can for the best price? That's what we all think. But then yet, like you said, on social media, or you see, I know I've been in this situation before when I was in Singapore and making a little bit of money. When I go to the restaurant, I wanted a nice bottle of wine at the table, not Petrus or anything like that. But in social media too, all like sensationalized or wines that are aspirational. That stuff does better. What that's I understand what you're saying, but that's where I see a little bit of disconnect, and I just haven't been able to put everything all together yet in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything, right? Like people buy things for all different reasons, right? Some people buy sneakers because they need to run faster. Some people buy sneakers because it's a collector's item. Some people buy sneakers because they just want to be comfortable. Like to put wine under one umbrella and think that it's one size fits all is ridiculous when it comes to marketing. So like, you have to figure out what consumers want at the very end and then figure out like what demographic do you fit into. I think I don't make wine, so that's just my
I love your story about sneakers, by the way, because people know that I played basketball pretty competitively when I lived in Singapore and I was playing in this professional amateur league. I bought a new pair of sneakers like every week. Whatever the new pair is, I had the brand new set of sneakers. But if somebody's asking you, okay, Amanda, Miss Vivant, I want to learn about wine. I want to learn about the wonders that wine has to offer. What are the wines or grape varieties that you would suggest them to try?
Oh, well, I do believe in drinking promiscuously. That was
I love that. That
was a phrase borrowed from Vanessa Collin, who used to host this podcast with me. So the way that there's a couple ways to approach this. Karen McNeil had a great philosophy. It was also kind of a shared philosophy that when I first started learning about wine, that was really helpful. And that was to either stick with like one particular region or one particular grape for a period of time and like just get to know it. I think the region is smarter than the actual grape, but like just literally put a map on the wall, throw a dart, and just like dive in, because I don't think there's one particular grape that is better than others in order to like get acquainted with. But I do think that honing in on specific grapes or specific regions to isolate variables can be really, really helpful. So for example, like we're going to be talking about Chenin Blanc, right? Chenin Blanc's produced all over the world. So if you wanted to spend an entire, 2 weeks, 3 weeks just tasting all the different Chenin Blancs of the world, you would get like a really good idea of what Chenin Blanc tastes like, not only from all the world, but also like how different climates and how different soils can affect it. And so you can kind of dive down the rabbit hole a little bit more easily than if you're like kind of scattered and trying to figure out like, well, what does Chenin Blanc from Savennieres taste like versus Chardonnay from Burgundy? Like those are too many variables to deal with when you first start. So I think like honing in, focusing, and then you gotta eat, you gotta snack with it because you gotta see how wines play with food. That's so important. I think I learned that too late. I don't think I realized how important that was because it really does change your perception of like, you know, how foods feel versus how acids feel versus how sugar, like I think all of that really plays a role into learning about wine. By the way, can we drink on the—
Yes, but unfortunately, we're going to get right to the wine. But unfortunately, the thing about food and wine, it's unfortunate for me, you're nice and petite. That's the thing I struggle with is weight in the wine industry. Like, because you're always
it's
around.
A struggle for all of us. So
okay. So let's talk about, it's a lot of people ask about for me to taste with other people. So we're going to taste the same wine here. This, you want to tell me about this appellation I absolutely love.
Yeah.
Savennieres.
You know, you say it just like it looks.
Yes. From France, based on,
the appellation is Savennieres. It's in the Loire Valley.
I love the pronunciation of the, like we say Chenin Blanc, but I love how the French Chenin.
So
tell me a little bit.
Get the pronunciation police involved, please.
Yeah. So
they're always after me.
You selected. Oh, I'm always getting pronunciations wrong, and people are commenting, and I'm always like, I'm changing countries all the time. Hungary, Portugal, Italy, France. Okay, sue me. All right, tell me about why you chose this wine.
Yeah, well, so this is, I mean, for those who are watching on Matthew's channel, this is actually a crossover episode that is going to be published on my podcast, Wide Access Unfiltered. And with that podcast is a podcast wine club where we pair every episode with a wine. It's a wine club. I do all the selections. And so a lot of times what happens is like, you know, we'll figure out what the episode theme is, and then we select the wine. But in this case, this is a wine that actually came to me first. And then we were like, how can we like leave this in? Because this is actually a direct import. So Wine Access imports this directly, which is why you're not going to see this a whole lot of other places. And when I tasted it, I was like, this is phenomenal. I love Chenin Blanc, and I love Chenin Blanc from Savennieres. Like I distinctly remember one of the first times I had it was back in New York, and it was the Clos de Papillon. And that, if you've ever had that wine, oh my gosh, it is like, you smell it, and you're like, it's just like jumping out of the glass. And it's all of these things that you've never smelled in wine before. Like it's appley, but it's floral, and it's like perfumed. And then there's like, it smells like butterflies are like having sex in your glass. Like that is
you know, we have to be, before we taste the wine, I love that you use that because these are like things like sex, you know, that's something that connects. There's a reason why, you know, sex, drugs, alcohol, violence sells. Something that's inside of us that we want to express. What do you think about descriptors like masculine, feminine in wines? You okay with it? Like I've had some women completely get on me about it.
Yeah, I think I was more okay with it, you know, before things changed, or you know, we became more aware of other genders. You know, I'm less okay with it now. Like I do think it's sort of an antiquated way of describing wines, and I think that we can do better. But I will say it was really helpful, you know, coming up in the wine world and like kind of having those boxes to associate it with. So I would love to find like different but similar boxes in that camp. I don't know. This feels like a landmine in some regards, but I avoid it. I do generally avoid the masculine feminine thing, but I do understand where it came from, because if you're thinking about wines that are just like softer and like more ethereal and that like have this sort of like feminine quality to them, there are wines like Chenin Blanc that fit into that category versus masculine wines that I think like Nebbiolo from Piedmont, right? Like if you're talking about like Barolo, aggressive, like, you know, muscular wine.
Nebbiolo to me is like a football player that also does ballet.
Yes, that's a perfect example.
I stole that from Madeline Puckett from Wine Folly. That's not mine.
No, it's great, right? Because it has all the intensity, but it's just so lithe and like easy on its feet. So it's a perfect example.
Before we taste this, let's say Kid A, he's like flush out which Chenin Blancs are dry versus which have RS. My thing is would be always to ask a shop owner, because sometimes even we can get confused. Do you have any tips on that?
No, I have no tips other than like it will say like occasionally we'll say like sec or something on it, but. Yeah, I mean, Savennieres, the thing with Chenin Blanc, and especially like Savennieres and even Vouvray, which is another appellation that Chenin Blanc can come from in the Loire Valley, they can have this like perceived sweetness thing, right? Where it feels like, or it smells like there's sweetness, there's actual sugar. And then you taste it And it has all of the flavors that we associate with being sweet, right? There's honey, there's dried apricots. Like there's all of these things that normally in our normal everyday life actually have sugar, but this wine is bone dry, right? There's actually no residual sugar because all of the sugar has been consumed by the yeast and turned into alcohol. So, I think Chenin Blanc can give you, when people are like, I like sweet wines, but I want to navigate to dry wines. This is a really good wine to do that with because I think it gives you that hint, right? Like even when you smell this wine, and by the way, this wine is actually too cold right now. So this is
let's let it, because I want to touch on this. Actually, I never told you this. We know each other. One of your TikToks actually has changed the way I communicated wine on my channel.
No way. Tell me.
Yes. The dry versus tannins, because people don't it's common knowledge to some wine folks, but to normal people, I'm like, oh yeah, they don't get it. Like dry, it's not the sensation in your mouth. It's the sugar is fermented almost to be non-existent anymore. That's a dry wine.
It's confusing, right? And I, working in a Napa Valley steakhouse with lots of Cabernet and the word tannin being thrown around a lot. Understandable that, people would say, I like a dry wine. And what they meant was, I like a tannic wine. I like that feeling of dryness. It's kind of silly, right? That we use this word dry to indicate sweet when you can have, and you regularly do, especially with red wine, have this dry feeling in your mouth. So it's confusing. And then you throw the term extra dry into it.
God, we don't even. I got a champagne video coming up on Sunday actually. Let's touch on. Let's taste this because I love the smell. Yeah. It smells like Savennieres to me. That's the thing about French, the French concept of terroir. And I think that's what I love about it. I mean, this obviously probably was barrel fermented or had some, but man.
500 liters. So very little barrel treatment, but it did see some for.
What do you pick up on this? What thing? This does smell to me, and I think of wines with a lot of acidity, like Riesling, Chenin, to be sexy. It does smell sexy.
Yeah, I think, it's funny. I never use the term butterflies having sex, but I actually think that this is like a wildly applicable descriptor for this wine because it does have this like sort of light, but like there's something very serious about it too, right? Like it's not a frivolous wine, but when you smell it, like if you want like the actual descriptors, like, it's dried apricot, there's like a perfumey, lilac-y, white floral thing going on in there. But more than anything, like this wine just like makes you feel something. Like it makes you feel like you want to be in love. And I think that's maybe like why like the butter, like you're having like sex in a garden. Like it feels like love in a glass. And it, the more you move your head around, the more you're like, oh yeah, there's like something really interesting here. But there's also something like kind of musky, right? There's something kind of savory, woolen. There's like a honeycomb thing on here. Like I swear to God, you could throw a dart at a board and hit, any descriptor and it would probably within the white camp be in this glass. What do you got?
For me, Savennieres, some Saumur Blanc, and dry Tokaj have this bruised apple smell that you would think my dad's a big farmer. We used to pack apples. We didn't used to grow them. That, you associate with an apple gone bad, but in wine, it's like, to me, just a little bit of vanilla from the barrel, but not too much. Yeah. Tons of bruised apple and like going outside and licking stones. This, to me, because Savennieres is not cheap. It's not expensive, but it's not cheap. Like I would always choose Savennieres.
This is 25 bucks.
What? I mean, good Savennieres are usually $50. Yep. 25 bucks. I'm actually going to blame you because I've been cutting weight. I've been running and stuff and not drinking at night. And I'm going to probably polish this whole bottle.
Glass or 3. But like the acid, like what's crazy is like you have all of these like sweet kind of things going on in those. And then you taste it and it has like searing acidity that's really kind of masked by the viscosity of this wine. So like what I mean is like, if you like that thickness, but it's not heavy because it's lifted by this like refreshing. So it's almost like somebody put like honey and lemon together in a glass. So it's like bright and lifted, but still like sweet. Yeah.
I love, you can actually expand on this. I love barrel fermented white wines because all wines actually have tannin, like even whites, but with barrel fermented whites, you get that sandy texture. You get a little bit more tannin.
Yeah.
You
like
want to talk about, do people ever say, like when you were doing your social media, working on the floor, like, oh, I feel a drying sensation when I'm drinking this wine? Acidity can also be can be confused with that too.
I think so. I think like I would always refer to it as like a phenolic sensation, So, and we think of tannin as being, very, very structured, but there's also like tannin, like peach skin, right? Like tannin in like apple skin. And so like, that's that sort of like very soft, like it coats the mouth, but then it resolves very quickly in the way that like a fruit skin would. So it's almost like biting into a peach, where it's not just the peach juice, it's not just the flesh, it's the skin as well. And that's kind of like what this wine is giving you, is not just the flesh and the juice. It's giving you a little bit of that structure coming from that barrel fermentation. And then I just, I love this idea of like bruised apple. I think that's a great, like Scott, who I used to work with, his like marker for Chenin was apple skin, and specifically like red apple skin. And I think he's right, because so many times Chenin Blanc does see a little bit of oak. And so you have this like really interesting juxtaposition of both the tannin that's coming from the wood, but then also this like brain tricking thing into it tasting like apple skin. So sort of like the perceived sweetness that we were just talking about, I think it gives you that. But it's such a fun wine. It's a fun wine to like, as it's opening, it's continuing to do things. I mentioned earlier, like this, I put this in the freezer because I needed to get it cold quickly. But now that it's coming down in temperature, or coming up in temperature, it's really starting to like take on some of that volume in the mouth, which is what I really like. And now I'm hungry and I want a snack. So.
I like how excited you're getting, because we both are I was hoping for a difference of opinion.
Oh.
so let's talk about this. Sam, us wine geeks are going to go crazy. It's a French wine. It's named after the appellation. It's more mineral driven. There's more of a sense of terroir. These can be difficult wines for new drinkers to get accustomed to. How do you cross
because of
them?
the acidity?
And the mineral flavors, like mineral, high acid. And look at Riesling. Sam's been singing its praises for years, but nobody buys Riesling except the Germans.
Thank God. Just keep it cheap.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's so cheap.
I know.
What would you like pair this with, or how would you kind of introduce this to a guest or people that want to get into these wines?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a cheese plate is an excellent place to start. The Loire Valley is known for its cheeses, right? I mean, if you think about this notion of what grows together goes together, like there are very few regions that are going to compete with the Loire Valley on that front. So I don't know. I think if like you're doing like a cheese, whether it's a goat's milk cheese or a cow's milk cheese even, I think doing it with like a fruit, a honey, something like that to kind of like mimic the flavors, I think that's a great place to go. I mean, you could go like the fish route, but I honestly think like the fresher, the better. Like think, the Loire Valley is the salad bowl of France, right? Like it's the bread basket, it's the salad bowl, it's where things are grown. And so I think if you think of like fresh bread, fresh salads, all of these things that you would like picnic with, like that's what you should pair with Chenin Blanc. So if you can, I think the moral story is like, if you can put it in a picnic basket and take it to a park and eat it, that's what you should have. Somebody's gonna be like, I actually take a brisket to the park. And I'm like, well, enjoy yourself.
Yeah, I mean that's a little bit difficult. Let's get to so first of all, thank you so much. How does Wine Access like work? Like I thought like you had some specific labels like non-producer wines, like people put that custom labels together. How does it work?
Yeah, so Wine Access is an online wine retailer. So there is no brick and mortar. They're just, it's based out of Napa. They've got 3 or 4 actual sommeliers on staff. So like Sir Lucero, who's a master of wine, Laura Koffer, who's an advanced sommelier, Eduardo Dingler, he's also certified sommelier and like sake genius. All of those guys have worked in like actual restaurants. So they had a long tenured career in the wine industry before moving to the retail side. So they do a lot of the hunting of wines. So the sourcing of wines from all over the world. And so what happens is like, there's the storefront where you can shop, but then they also do these limited time offers. So a lot of times it's like direct imports that Wine Access will actually go out. Like, so Eduardo will go to the Loire Valley and find producers that are not yet being brought into the United States, and they'll bring them in themselves. And so that will go out on like a limited time offer, but then sometimes it will make it into the store. So it's a little bit confusing, but like once you understand the system, like it's really fun because there's sort of a treasure hunt. And like, if you sign up for their emails, like I'm contracted to do this podcast. I don't officially work for Wine Access, which is the most fun because I get to like, live in like both worlds.
Yeah.
like as a freelancer. But what I love is like Wine Access really does find some amazing wines from everywhere. So like they'll direct import champagne. And then I think what you were alluding to is the NDA wines. Is that where you're kind of Yeah. So the NDA wines is a really interesting notion that I didn't even know existed until I moved to Napa and I started working with Wine Access. I thought it was fake, but it's real. So basically what happens is like, especially in Napa Valley or in California in general, a lot of these wineries, for many different reasons, they have extra juice, right? Or they have a need to move quantity. And so what happens is Wine Access will come in and they will buy either like, barrels, sometimes they'll buy shiners, they'll buy this extra juice. And then they sign this NDA that says, we will never disclose where we got this from. We will bottle it under a completely different label. And so that's where these NDA wines come into play. So like Color and Sound, Halpin, Yesterday, Radio Silence, those are all NDA wines. And you are basically buying like super premium Napa Valley Cabernets that would cost you anywhere from $150 to $500 a bottle for like $30. It's amazing. Like truly,
it's a negotiant model from France, basically.
It is, but it's also, yes, I mean, it is a negotiant, but I think they take it one step further in some ways. Yeah.
Well, before we get to a question here, because you have experience at this, living in Napa, what I have a friend, Robert Joseph. He's a British wine writer now. He does a lot of consulting. He wrote a very not controversial, but he wrote an interesting article saying wine doesn't need more educators; it needs more seducers. And when I see you talking about this wine, he told me that's what I am doing too, to make wine fun, pull people in. What are your thoughts on? That's what I think when I saw 100%. You talking about this wine.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% true. I think if you think about like the reason that we follow anybody or listen to anything anyone has to say, it's because like they're talking about it with passion, right? Like they're making you fall in love. They're, again, going back to what we were talking about before, they're either contextualizing it or giving you a reason to care about it. And I think he's right. I think that like you need to do both, right? You need to seduce people into it and make it sexy, but you also need people there on the back end to support that education so that people understand. It's not just like doing, a makeup tutorial, right? Where people are falling in love with makeup. You have to actually, like, no one is going to look at this. You can look at a thing of Maybelline and figure it out. Nobody's going to look at this bottle of Savennieres and be like, oh yes, of course, like Laglerie for sure. Like I know exactly what that means. Like that is insane. There is nothing on this label that suggests that you should know what this means, right? The producers on there, Gaec Martin, Chenin Blanc, AOP Savennières. Anyone who doesn't know wine doesn't know what that means. And so you need to, number one, have someone tasting this wine like we are, who are smelling it and talking about it and seducing. But you also need someone there to be like, Gaec Martin's a producer, Chenin Blanc is a grape, Savennières is where it's made. End of story.
That answers Blair's question, what it was. We're going to answer a few questions here. I want to get to that point. Before we answer a few questions, you had a great TikTok about champagne growers versus house. And you talk about specifically how champagne's one of those appellations that has a lot of information on the label. But we're not talking about champagne here. We're talking about what you just said. There's a lot of information on a label, but what frustrates, I think, a lot of drinkers is it doesn't tell me if I'm going to enjoy the wine or not.
Yeah.
What I have my philosophy. What is your biggest tip in terms of helping people, or where people should seek guidance to see if, hey, is this wine good or not?
I think it's the importer, right? That's the secret sauce, which of course requires doing a little bit of legwork to figure out who you can trust. But the whole reason that we buy anything in life usually has to do with a trust agent, someone that we trust implicitly on a specific subject. So, for me, like there's a skincare influencer that I follow that like, if she says it's good, then I will usually buy the product. And I think, the wine importers in a lot of ways do the same thing. So like the Kermit Lynch's, the Becky Wassermans, the Jose Pastor. Yeah, like those guys are, in the same way that like Wine Access is an importer as well. Like these guys, even within Wine Access, like you can often figure out like, I really love wines that Laura Koffer finds. I really love wines that like, you can find these specific people. I think that's the move, because there's just too much out there to sift through otherwise. Like even for me, Like if I see a wine on the shelf and I'm like, I usually turn it around to be like, who imports this? And that's a pretty big tell because there's usually a philosophy and an ethos that goes behind the selection process that says, hey, we believe in this enough that we think that you guys are going to like it as well. And so, it becomes this this easy trust agent. Do you have a tip for this? Because that's my best one.
That is a great tip. That's the second tip I go for to get a little bit more pragmatic. I always tell people just find a shop, get out of the supermarket, and ask the employees. Tell them the last wine that you drank that you really enjoyed. They know what's there. They're going to try to help you. They're not like, wine isn't a high margin product. Unfortunately, people think it is because they think of just the benchmarks. But most wine, one of the great wines, I think $30 to $50, you can drink some of the greatest wines in the world. And those are not high margin wines. So just trust the shop owner. They're going to try their best to match your preferences with what you told them. That's my tip.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great tip. I think the same goes for restaurants. Like this, in the same way that the shops know their wines, like the somms who build your wine list at restaurants, like you don't need to go to Vivino to get the aggregate score of whatever wine in the list. Like you can just ask figure out because they know, right? Like that, first of all, that wine probably wouldn't be on the list if they didn't think it was worth being there. But also like we all have our favorites. Like usually we're all tasting, even if you're not the wine director, usually all the somms are like in on the selection process. So like just ask.
I've got a hot take on somms, and I don't mean this to be insulting because
Did I brace myself?
I think you would probably be great. And I think it's different for me going into a restaurant. I find that the great somms actually are asking questions and listening instead of just telling. I found all too much, even in really nice restaurants, somms not really hearing my question and just spouting out all this stuff. And I don't say I'm working in wine or I'm in the wine profession.
Yeah.
And also pushing tasting menus. That will just irk me to death as a somms pushing a tasting menu on me, especially when I'm ready to buy a bottle.
Like a wine pairing?
No, yeah, usually because I feel like a lot of times it's stuff they need to get rid of, or it's kind of mid-price wine, especially if there's a good wine list. I want to select what I want to drink. I've had too many bad experiences with tasting menus.
Oh, that's a bummer.
So I don't know what your take is. Like, let's go with that because you could prove me wrong. Tasting menus. Tell me how much work it goes into it when you're working at a restaurant.
So much work. I mean, the tasting menu is like really, if you want to learn about food and wine pairing, like 101, do the tasting menu with the wine pairings. I would say with the exception of maybe like 1 or 2 times, I've had amazing experiences with wine pairings in tasting things that I never would have put together. For example, I was back when, before Ever, which is the 3 Michelin Curtis Duffy restaurant in Chicago. It was just featured on The Bear. Yep, it was great show, right? So back before he had Ever, he had this restaurant called Grace, another 3 Michelin starred restaurant. And we went there. I did not have enough money to be at the restaurant, first of all, but we did the wine pairing. And on the very last dish, last savory dish, they did this Wagyu with a bougie Cerdon, which if you're listening, you're like, I don't know what that is. Very few people do. This is a very esoteric sparkling wine from the Savoie region. And it's a slightly sweet, like pink hued sparkling wine. And I remember I had it before because when I worked in New York, I worked at a restaurant and I loved it. And I wanted to have it as a dessert option. And the owner was like, absolutely not, like it will not sell, which in fairness, she was probably right. But I go to Grace and they serve me this Wagyu with this bougie Cerdon, this slightly sweet pink sparkling. And my mind was absolutely blown. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, Wagyu does not want a heavy red wine. It wants a slightly sparkling, slightly sweet wine because there's so much fattiness and richness there from this heavily marbled piece of meat. And it's really savory. So you want the opposite of both of those things. You want sweet and you want acid. So having that pairing kind of changed how I viewed not only like this wine, but also how I'm pairing food and wine in general. So I think you can, like, those are the places where you can have exceptional experiences because the somms are working with the chef, they're tasting the dishes, they're experimenting, and they're the ones who are able to take, hundreds of risks because distributors are dropping off bottles. And so they can taste lots and lots of different things and figure out what works. It may not be like your favorite thing. And it may not be obviously the fanciest bottle because, by the way, like this is not an expensive wine. Bougie Sardon probably costs $20 retail, if that. And this particular one is imported by Kermit Lynch. So
Ooh,
I
so
just,
it's good.
yeah. So I think there's moments like that where people go into a wine tasting or wine pairing experience thinking that they're going to get really expensive, lavish bottles. When in reality, like a wine pairing is really just designed to accentuate the food or to make you, take a left turn with the food that's sort of unexpected. So that's kind of my take on it. I love ordering bottles. Sometimes I just I don't want to have 7 glasses in front of me, and I totally respect that. So sometimes I will just order a bottle of wine, but I think you can have a really fun journey. And I think the other thing is suss out your som first. Like if you're vibing, if you feel like that's your person, go with the wine pairing. You're likely to have an incredible experience and discover things that you never would have discovered otherwise.
Well, first of all, I'm the geekiest of geeks. And I haven't had a Bougie Sardon. I actually have never had one, and I love I love Lambrusco.
I love Lambrusco.
Good Lambrusco.
Yes, we just had Lambrusco in our last shipment.
And I love how you're talking about it. I love how passionate you're getting. Especially, it's so interesting to see you live and maybe more impromptu versus curated content. Let's answer. I want to get to an important question, but I want to answer this because this is in your backyard. I think Feng Kerr. He asked the specific, and this is a winery everybody knows. He's like, "What do you think about Stag's Leap Wine Cellars?" They're owned by Philip Morris, is that right? They're owned by a tobacco company, if I remember right.
That's news to me.
They're owned by a tobacco company, and then Warren just died, right? Recently.
Yeah, no, I thought. Well, so Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. I always confuse the two.
Not Stag's Leap Winery. Stag's Leap Wines, the classic, that one that was
yeah. So
high in the Judgment of Paris.
They were owned by Saint Michel, and then I think Antonelli just bought the remaining stake, if I'm not mistaken.
So, what do you think about the wines? They're
beautiful.
Yeah, I think they're so good.
The hardest thing about those wines is that if you taste the Fay Vineyard, if you taste what is it,
SLV, the one that was in the Judgment of Paris.
Yeah, if you taste those wines young, they're very Stag's Leap. They're true to the place, which is incredibly tannic, so structured. That gives you that intense dry feeling. I think those wines just take a really long time to come around. And so for me, I'm not drinking those wines young. I want them with age, but I mean, that's just a personal preference.
I mean,
I think they're beautiful.
Stag's Leap wines, Stag's Leap, the district, so unique because it's on the valley floor, but I get from the wines tobacco. I feel like they're the most tobacco-y out of any, Oakville next door is a little bit more broad, a little bit more
generous. It's the
generous.
biggest showgirl of the Appalachians.
All good wines though.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Stag's Leap is there's that wind that basically comes through every afternoon. So you get thicker skins, which is going to give you more of that tannic structure, which I think, allows you to really feel the skins more than you do the juice in some ways. And so I think there is a lot of tobacco qualities in those wines.
Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to ask you about what do you've got one of the biggest wine Instagram accounts, probably the biggest wine TikTok account. Tell me about your experience, something I can never experience being a woman in the wine business.
I mean, I get offers to have sugar daddies all the time. So it's on me for not, I've never had Chateau Le Pen, or just Le Pen, but it's probably on me for not taking out those offers. I think the biggest thing, and I feel you see it even more now, is the how do I put this? I have a lot of I've been in the industry as a somm for over a decade. I like to think that I know a thing or two about wine. I don't know everything, right? And we're all here to learn. But I find in the comments, it's never a female that's coming in and be actually, this wine was produced in 1977. And
the mansplaining.
The mansplaining of it all, that, the correcting or the coming into my comments to come to the rescue of people who are asking questions before I can get there. I find that to be the case more so, as a female than as a male. I'm sure the men in the audience who maybe have an Instagram or TikTok maybe deal with it the same, but it's just so funny to me that without fail, it doesn't matter how much experience you have in the world as a female, there will always be a man there to let you know that it's okay, sweetheart. We've got you covered.
Well, when I started my project, I was with my longtime girlfriend. So she's a tiny Asian woman. Best palate, actually, she's not my girlfriend anymore. best palate I've ever tasted with. I feel like could outtaste with, and I actually prefer to taste with women. When I judge competitions, I learn more from women enologists. I think what's hard, can you speak on this? Because you're a wine Instagrammer, although I think you're the best. Like your content is very, very, very good.
Man,
Very
this is,
helpful.
pumping me up today. Thanks.
No, I think it's excellent because I have a lot of wine Instagram friends. I'm on press trips a lot with wine Instagrammers.
Yeah.
I find it so difficult because obviously sometimes the way that they're posing or the pictures they're taking, that's going to lead to more likes and followers. But then they start to resent that because they're not getting accepted for their knowledge or anything in the wine biz. And I find that an interesting, on the flip side, it can be frustrating for a man or maybe sometimes some older women. Like I heard a pop study once that says if a man has 10,000 followers on Instagram, it's almost equivalent to like an attractive woman having 100,000. So like, cause it's a visual platform. I don't know if you want to speak. I think that you're the best I've seen. And I'm not just saying that cause you're on here. And that's why I wanted you on here. You're the best. You're obviously, you're an attractive woman, but you're the best at not leaning into that fully and giving value, actually giving knowledge and value. You want to speak? I'm sorry about my rambling a little bit. I wonder if you want to speak on that a little bit. Cause I'm sure you have a lot of friends in the biz
I mean,
too.
I don't know. I think like you always, even in hospitality, you sort of like dance this weird line, or you toe this line of, having to be attractive. And I'm not talking like physically sexual attractive, but like being attractive to your guests. And so, towing that line of like making sure that people like you without crossing it is like, it's really hard to do. I don't know that like, I think at the end of the day that like if it feels uncomfortable, if it feels like then I have to pull back. I have to either not post it or delete it or whatever. I'm also very private. And I think that's the biggest thing is like, I don't post my personal life on my Instagram. So people don't know, what my marital situation is. Like maybe eventually they will, but people have never seen my significant other. So I'm also, and my family doesn't really make it on there a lot. So I think I have this like sort of hard line of making sure that like I'm delivering content in a professional, but a quote unquote attractive way without giving too much of myself over. In some ways, I think maybe that's how you toe it. I think you just can't give everything of yourself. And that's how at least that's how it's worked for me. I think, I don't know.
Well, you're
DM, so maybe I'm not doing that good of a job.
I mean, what people don't know, one of my fascinating hobbies is I read a lot of evolutionary psychology. I'm fascinated with men and women, intersexual dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like I said, I think that you've done the best that I've seen at it. Howie, I see you there. We're going to have you come on and ask a question. So turn your camera on if you want to, or you just keep your audio on. Let me ask you one more question too, before we take a caller in, a call in. Maybe you want to speak to this and see, maybe, do you feel like you've missed out on some of these opportunities? And let me reframe that. I feel like at stuff like wine events, tastings, press trips, that kind of stuff, the best stuff always happens. Where you're going to get the best stories, the most inside information after, when everybody's had a few drinks. And I just I've known this because, I said my ex-girlfriend in the business was a tiny woman. She didn't want to be involved in that after us. And I see that. I totally get it. And then I feel bad sometimes. Some of my women friends, they want to partake in the stuff, but they can't sometimes, and they have to duck out. Do you feel some of your experiences there?
Sorry, I didn't turn my notifications off. Yes. I talk about this a lot. I am really, really careful about how late I stay to things and what I subject myself to. Are there good stories? 100%. Do you network? 100%. Does the upside weigh the potential downside? It doesn't for me. It doesn't. I think that there's other ways for me to network and to get ahead, and it's not going to happen at 2:00 in the morning at a wine bar. It's just not going to happen. I think I've learned the hard way a handful of times, and after that, it's like, it's not worth it. Like whatever you think you're getting out of going and out of meeting people, like people are drinking. It's just the nature of like what's going to happen. There's no excuse for it. There never is. But when you put yourself in that situation, you should do so knowing that there could be consequences that are unintended. So for me personally, it's a hard line that I've drawn in terms of being a hospitality professional, making sure, one, If I'm out in a professional setting, I'm never getting drunk. I will drink, I will sip, I will have a glass of wine, but I will never be drunk, publicly drunk. One, because I don't want to be at a, I don't want to be seen as being drunk, but also two, like, you need to make good decisions and you need to be able to call it quits when you know the time is right. So it's, there's some tough things about being a woman in the industry. There's some great things about being a woman in the industry as well. Just like anything in life, like your gender does dictate a little bit of what you do, but there's always ways to navigate around it.
I totally get it. Let's shift gears. I just wanted to get into that. Oh, I had somebody, guys, anybody that's in the Grand Reserve channel member, I left the link in the community tab. You can come up on screen. Howie just left. I was going to give him on. Let's taste our next wine together. We pick separate. So what selection you have? You can tell me what to choose from, and I'll ask you which one I should open.
Okay. So I'm at my parents' house right now because we lost power last night. And I decided to raid my mom's wine fridge, which, by the way, has leveled up from the ski closet. She has an actual KitchenAid under cabinet wine fridge. But in there are some gems. And I thought it would be fun to open one. So our choices this evening are 2015 Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve or 2021 Conundrum White Wine. I think there is merit in both, and I will tell you why. I am open to drinking either. I will say 2015 Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve Chardonnay. I'm not sure the lifespan of a wine like this, but if you want me to open it and find out, I will. The Conundrum is a really interesting wine because I would say probably my earliest memory of ordering a bottle of wine out to dinner is the Conundrum White Wine that we ordered at like a Capitol Grill in Philadelphia long time ago. So I have a special place in my heart for wines like this. I think it's a wine that I think both of these wines are wines that get people in the door that are shit on all the time, and I fully support. So I'm open to opening either of these.
I'm gonna. I know the Conundrum's nearest and dearest to your heart.
Yes.
I'm really interested how the Kendall Jackson. All right. For you, before we both open, I'll let you choose for me.
Yes.
People on the channel, one that like you have wines that everybody can get. I have sometimes some esoteric wines. So I have one that's a lot of people don't know about, but they can get. First, I have the Antonelli Montefalco Rosso from Umbria, 2020, Sangiovese Sagrantino. I think there's Merlot in this. This is one of the best values. Montefalco Rosso, one of the best values in Italy and red wine in general. Okay. Or Sangiovese, probably my favorite red wine grape everyone on the channel knows. Or really geeky, producer, brand new, Khachen Areni from Armenia, 2022. Ooh. The grape. So
all right, that sounds really interesting. I'm gonna have you open the Umbrian one just because
it's more
available. I'm not sure like how much we're gonna be able to talk about the Armenian one because I have no context for it.
Okay. So Kendall Jackson, let's talk about your wine because actually I did a cheap Chardonnay a Chardonnay under $25 video. Kendall Jackson finished in second place. I went out and bought that wine. It's a wine people poo-poo on. It still gets lovely scores. Actually, they get 90-point scores regularly. Blind tasting, I get, oh my God, it's an orange wine. I gave it, your mom had that? Or is that yours?
It was in my mom's wine fridge. I don't recall why. This might have been a wine that like I was sent that like made it into her wine fridge. And by the way, this is a plastic cork, so I don't feel great about what's going on in here. I think they've actually gone back to actual corks because actual corks are more sustainable. And Jackson Family Wines, who owns Kendall Jackson, they are all about sustainability. So I think they've reverted back to.
I think when I opened the newest vintage, I think it had a DM. I'm not sure though. I can't remember.
It might have.
Which I prefer I prefer Stelvin.
Well, we can have a whole conversation about that. So the thing with Kendall Jackson, I got to visit their winemaking facilities, which are in the Central Coast, basically Monterey, right? I got to visit them a couple of years ago, and I've done a lot of work with Jackson Family over the years, and I love them. I love working with them. In fact, I was just in Las Vegas because Kendall Jackson is now the official wine sponsor of the NBA,
which I want to talk about. And they reached out to me to send samples, and they still haven't got back to me. Kendall Jackson, but go ahead. But go ahead.
I love them. They've only ever done right by me, and I think they do right by the wine industry. It's, they're a bigger company, so they get a lot of hate, but I do think that of the big companies, they do by far the best when it comes to like their winemaking process. And so what I was getting to is in Monterey, when I went to go see the facilities, what was incredible to me is that Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve Chardonnay, first of all, it's all made from grapes. I assumed it was all oak chips. I assumed that they were putting it in huge vats and just putting it. They're barrel fermenting with actual new French oak and then aging the wine in actual new French oak. Every single bottle of Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve Chardonnay. Do you know how expensive that would be?
That's impressive. That
isn't
wine's
it?
$17.99 on the shelf.
Yes. All like Lee and like, oh, and Lee stirring. They're doing that nash.
You know,
Wild.
it's
For
so
sure.
funny.
I was like, a wine, you know, any wine in that like $15-ish category, especially Chardonnay, you can pretty much safely assume there is some sort of synthetic something happening, right? Whether it's oak chips or liquid oak or something weird is happening, right? No, this is all like I saw it firsthand. Barrel fermented, Lee stirring. The barrels had just dropped. This was like maybe August that I was there. So I saw all of the barrels in there. It was incredible. All right, so I should taste this wine. So I will describe it for those who are listening.
Well, talk about how white wines gain color with age.
Yeah, so
because it looks like an orange wine.
Yeah, so white wines gain color. It's just like an apple oxidizes, right?
Yeah.
It, you know, as air hits it and it oxidizes, it's going to turn, you know, more and more brown, just like an apple would. It doesn't necessarily mean that the wine has gone bad. It's just the nature of like what is happening chemically in the glass. So this wine is kind of like an amber hue right now, which I don't love for a 9-year-old Chardonnay. But
that's why I said, be honest here. Be honest.
Yeah, but I will, you know, that plastic cork. You know, people think the plastic's not letting it. There's a lot of air that's allowed to interact with this wine, which is why this wine has gotten so much color. So on the nose, it's pretty bruised apple and not in a good way. Like it almost smells like spoiled fruit.
I mean, this wine's designed to be drank right away.
It is the one. When people talk about like how long can I age my wine, like situations like this wine would have been delicious in the first 2 years of its life. Beyond that, probably not. So. I mean, the nose is not altogether too appealing. There is like a little bit of like honey on there, like that really dark, like amber hued honey, like, you know, like acacia honey.
Yeah.
It kind of smells like that. So let's try it.
I hope it's a hot mess.
You know, it's not bad. It's not bad. It's actually has all of these like acacia honey notes without the sweetness. It's a little mushroomy, which I don't want in Chardonnay normally, unless it's Burgundy.
Of course.
But I will say, like, for a wine that's at this price point, this probably also made its way from Florida, so God only knows how it was stored. But
yeah,
all things considered, like this is still very much wine. Like it's not tasting like some obfuscated monster.
Well, let's leave that in the glass for a little while because I'm big on high quality wines. Should improve in the glass, even if they're aged. I mean, sometimes they're oxidized and they fall apart quite quickly, but I'm interested in how that comes along. Yeah. I have the Antonelli. Do you have experience with Montefalco Rosso?
Yes. I was actually just in Umbria last year.
Yeah. I mean, I go to on Premier every year, Anteprima. It's one of the best great. I mean, this wine, when you're in Italy, is like $12. In the US, it's like $19.99. Sangiovese, Sagrantino, you can put Merlot, Cabernet Syrah, like some Colorino, all that other stuff in it. Mostly Sangiovese.
Yummy.
Oh, do you know this producer, by the way?
No.
Pretty iconic producer for Sagrantino.
No. Sagrantino is not, as much as I am familiar, I'm not overly familiar. I know Sagrantino to be a fairly brash grape. Like if you were to go back to that masculine feminine thing, like it's a fairly masculine grape. Like
it's a cowboy. It's a cowboy.
Yeah, cowboy's a good. Yeah, it's a little rustic. It's a little intense. Often like a little leathery. That's a good descriptor for.
So Montefalco Rosso, I did a whole video that did really well on Montefalco Rosso. I blind tasted like 12. Sangiovese is my favorite red wine grape. Riesling's my favorite grape overall. Sangiovese is my favorite red wine grape. Montefalco Rosso is familiar enough for fans of Central Italian Tuscan wines because of that sour cherryness. However, that just little bit of Sagrantino adds that little bit of spice, that little bit of tannin. Alcohol is high, even though they don't taste that 14.5. Sometimes they get to 15.5, but because there's so much Sangiovese in it, so much acidity, it just kind of wipes your palate clean. Yeah. And I think that this is consistently, Montefalco Rosso is not just Antonelli's, one of the best buys for Italian red wine. That's, okay. And I will die on that. I will I will put that out there. I will live on that hill. So
Okay, so what does it taste? What does this one taste like?
it is. It doesn't all the way. There's some. You know how there's you in Tuscany. You either have those really fruity wines, or you have the ones that are that can have a lot of VA, can become quite traditional, quite balsamic, quite earthy.
Yes.
This is like in between. There's no VA, so it's quite clean, but it's not all the way fruit and generic, where it's just another generic wine.
Yes.
VA,
by the way, VA is volatile acidity. For those of
Yes.
you wondering, it's that shoe polish, nail polish remover kind of smell. Italian wines love to have
it.
They love their VA. They call it lift, but some people call it disgusting. So if it's not your thing, stay away from Italian wines.
And any wine that's aged in the barrel will have some VA because wine wants to move into vinegar. So it's got enough fruit. It's concentrated enough. This was 2020, warmer vintage. 19 was a perfect vintage. It's full body, but it has so much acidity that it just wipes your palate clean. And Secretina, which can be pretty tannic. This is not tan. Chianti Classicos, especially mountain ones from the ones out, Rada is my favorite village. The tannins can be quite hard. But this is not, because Umbria is lower elevation, it's warmer, so the tannins are quite round. I mean, this is fabulous wine.
Good. I'm so glad. I went back to I'm going to kick that KJ Vintage Reserve out of bed because I don't think it's going anywhere good. But I will say the Savenniere is getting
the Savenniere better. I drank like a third of the bottle. That's how good it is. I mean, that's it's
really delicious.
Tell me your philosophy on this. When you're doing tastings with a lot of people, or blind tastings, or you're getting together with wine geeks, we can pontificate and talk about wine, but to me the best wine is the one that was the emptiest, or the bottle's finished.
100%. 100%. No, it's the only way that I can judge whether I liked a wine or not. It was like, did I drink a lot of it? Then it was good.
Let's talk about I want to go to a segment that you had an idea on. I think it's fantastic. Yes. But let's talk about glasses first. What you're drinking out of? Is that a Gabriel?
It is a Gabriel. It's a Gabriel glass. So this is my go-to glass pretty much for everything. In fact, I think I'm going to do a video on it tomorrow. Actually, one of my most viral videos ever was on this glass right here. So it's a universal wine glass, Austrian crystal. This is like their standard. So this is the one that's machine blown, but they do make a hand blown that's basically 3 times the price because it's a lot thinner. But this is my favorite just go-to glass. In fact, I mentioned at my mom and dad's house, like I stocked my mom's place with this. My sister stocked with them. I'm stocked with them at home. I'm a huge fan of Gabriel Glas.
It's my favorite glass. People on the channel know both the standard. Like I don't use the gold as much as I'd like to because it's so thin. But ironically, I'm drinking out of a Zalto right now, the competitor. But Gabriel is my favorite. So talk about glassware as a Sam. Also, like, how important is it to you?
So important. Glassware can make or break a wine. And in fact, even the good wine glasses, even like Zaltos, for example, like Zaltos, interestingly, don't love California wine, most California wine. So we used to do side-by-sides at press, and I'll never forget, Scott sat me down because we were considering going to Zaltos. We were a Riedel house, and we started tasting California wines and Riedels versus Zaltos. And the Zalto is almost like too angular for the California wines. The Riedels that had that softer bowl really kind of like it accentuated the wine, but it also like kept the wine together. Whereas the Zalto kind of made the California Cabernets like very weirdly disjointed. But yeah, I mean, a great wine glass can make or break a wine. It can make a great wine incredible. A bad glass can ruin a great wine, but it can also and this is the thing that I think people don't realize, a great wine glass can elevate your $15 bottle of wine.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be you don't have to be drinking $80 bottles of wine to have a great stem and have it matter and have it impact it in some way. A great wine glass will make your $15 bottle of wine taste like a $30 bottle of wine, and temperature as well.
Well, what's your take on this? So Gabriel Glas is my favorite. It's my go-to.
Mm-hmm.
I love universal glass shape or Bordeaux shape. For almost everything, except this is my hot take. The only thing it doesn't work with is Pinot Noir.
Pinot's tough. It depends where it's coming from. The owners of Gabriel Glas would argue that it does work for Pinot.
I know they would.
they love their Pinot, especially from Burgundy. I think you're right in some ways. I will say that I will definitely use my Gabriel Glas for champagne, but I have a love affair with the Josephine and Hute champagne glass. Wildly expensive and so over the top, but like I am telling you, like when I pour bubbles in a Josephine Hute, like it's perfect. But it's, those are not the glasses that I'm breaking out like on an everyday basis. Like I went to try, I'm going to give too much away. I went to go try on a wedding dress and I brought my own wine glasses with me with a bottle of champagne. And I brought the Josephine Hute because the aesthetic of those glasses, the way that they make you feel, there is something about that glass that I think works so incredibly well for champagne. So that was what I brought for that. But I will say, like my LBD, my little black dress, is the Gabriel Glas.
I love the.
Yeah.
I thought for a second you were gonna say your guilty pleasure for champagne was the coupe.
Oh. No, I don't. It's so funny. I was just at an event where they served really good sparkling in a coupe, and I was like, ugh, why?
It's so funny. I was with Tatin J and a while ago with one of the owners, and they said, it doesn't accentuate the wine's best, but because it's historical, we like to drink out of coupes a lot.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
The coupe was really invented to take shots of champagne with.
I thought it was the legend was it was after the breast of
the legend I think is somewhat true, but also like the reason that shape even existed was because back in the day champagne wasn't the quality that it is now. It was meant to like literally like you pour a little bit, you shoot it back almost like you would shoot vodka. So that was the purpose of the coupe glass.
Let's go to this segment. I thought you were really interesting. This is a segment that you usually do on your podcast. So now you're the boss here. You're in charge. So you lead this segment here.
Yeah, so we on Wine Access Unfiltered, which is my podcast, my show. We always do like a little current events, 10, 15 minutes. We'll try to keep it brief because I know we're getting close to time. So
if it goes good, it's all good. But just go ahead.
Okay, so we'll start with and I know you're someone that travels a lot. You're a nomad like I am. Today, July 17th, Fly with Wine just filed for Chapter 7. So this is the company that if you've ever seen those wine suitcases, this is the company that makes them. And interestingly, they were actually just on Shark Tank. But I mentioned that because number one, Chapter 7 means that they are able to liquidate their assets. So hopefully we might see, I'm sorry for them, but also maybe we'll see some like cheaper wine suitcases. But they also have a few competitors now. So like Wine Enthusiast has their own called Vino Voyage. But I was actually curious off of that, what your favorite way to travel with wine is. Because I love that suitcase and that suitcase fits 12 bottles. They've always been perfect, checking on the plane. But do you have any other like hot tips on traveling with wine?
So I do, because I bring back a lot of wine because I have to, sometimes I bring back samples from trips because it's easier to get producers to ship me or importers. I actually have some of those products from a different company my friend started. I can't remember the name of it because it's so long. So I bring those.
Good friend, Matthew.
Yeah, I know. I'm a great friend. I bring those to tastings. Like I taste with collectors every month. So if I bring 12, but for me, all I use are sleeves and clothes. I always go to a place. I know what my checked luggage is, back, how many bottles I can fit back in. I'm bringing anywhere from 12 to 60 back into the US.
Wow.
And
you're just putting it in suitcases? You don't even put it in like shippers?
No. Sometimes I do. When I did 60, I did 3 shippers and then a couple suitcases. Usually on small trips, I'll bring back anywhere from 6 to 12. And all I'm doing is wrapping in clothes, or I have some sleeves, but I ran out. I don't have all the sleeves that have some foam padding in them. And I actually, knock on wood, have never had a problem with a bottle. As long as it's packed tight and it's cushioned. Wine bottles are a little tougher than you'd give them credit for. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I use the sleeves. So the Wine Angels, like you can buy them on Amazon. I like those because they've got the, what's it called? The bubble wrap in there, but also they're Velcro, so they're reusable. So some of them were when they first came out with them, they weren't reusable, which I didn't love. Now they're reusable and they're great. You just slide them in there and they actually like take up less space. There's some that I just ordered on Amazon that are like the inflatable ones. So I'm curious about those, but I find that that's going to take up too much space. And then the other thing that I don't think a lot of people realize, even like a friend of mine who's a wine professional, she was like, I need to ship like a magnum of wine back home. Like, what should I do? And I was like, well, just take it with you on the, like not on the plane, but check it. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, you can get a wine shipper. So get a Magnum wine shipper, which is, the styrofoam in the box.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. Fragile on there. You can check it. And I think not a lot of people know that you can actually check like cases of wine onto your plane.
Yep.
I've got status on American. So like back in the spring, I've been like gradually moving lots of wine with me. I fill up, all the wine shippers I possibly can. I tape them up really, really good, and I check them. I rate fragile, and like, touch wood, I've never had any issue. The only thing I will say is use the styrofoam ones. Do not use the like biodegradable, like those cardboardy things that like are, kind of, what's it called? Biodegradable. So.
Yeah, I'm still on here, by the way. I just lost
Okay.
my camera, by the way, so I'll have to keep this on here.
Okay.
I think a lot of people don't realize too that you can also use just the suitcase. If you have 23 kilograms, 50 pounds,
Yeah.
I take like a carry-on bag, put some clothes in there, and I can get 12 bottles pretty easily on the way back. So that's my hot tip.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry the Fly with Wine is going out of business. I wish them well in whatever endeavor is next for them. The next order of business that we have, wine enthusiasts. This is very exciting. I'm sure you get a lot of DMs. I get a lot of DMs about which wineries to go to when you're traveling to a region.
Yeah.
Today, Wine Enthusiasts just launched a tasting room directory, basically like a resi for wine tasting, where you can go on their website, filter by region, and they'll show you all the different tasting rooms that are available. You can actually book right through the website. I think it's via Talk. And it shows you, of course, not only the experience, but also at the bottom, it shows you all the wines they make. And of course, the wine enthusiast scores that are corresponding, which I think is an enormous step forward for the wine industry and for wine travel. Wine travel, I think, is getting more and more popular. It's my favorite way to learn about wine. It's my favorite way for other people to learn about wine. And we really have sort of lacked a resource in this area for a long time.
I've had a couple friends that have tried to start up some of those apps actually to get, and I think it's a great idea. But don't you think already hotel businesses, hotel people don't realize how fragmented the hospitality business is.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that can work in wine. I'd like to think it can.
I think it can. I know what you're talking about, and I've been really reticent to show support for any of these like startups before, but I think it's because it has been, they've like, oh, sign up this person. I think Wine Enthusiast is going to be far more comprehensive in terms of like region, because you can already see on here, it's not just like California, like they've got Michigan, they've got Virginia, they've got tons of regions on here. And I think they have the resources to make this very comprehensive and accessible. So I'm very optimistic about this one. It's the first time I've been optimistic.
Okay, that's well, I hope so. Wine Enthusiast has a database. By the way, I miss my really good camera because now I look like crap compared to.
Oh, you look great. We'll put a little bit in you. So that's the news. If you're traveling for wine, keep an eye on that. It just launched today. And last but not least, I thought this was very interesting. Pernod Ricard. They own Jameson, Beefeater, Absolute Vodka. They're offloading most of their major wine brands. So they just offloaded 10 Australian wine brands because wine is not bringing in the cash as much as spirits are. Is this surprising to you? Hot takes?
So I'm going to ask you first because you work in the biz. So I just read that article today.
Yeah.
There's this all the doom and gloom in the wine business. Obviously, there's a lot of competition between other alcoholic drinks. I've talked to other people in the business saying that, you know what, like Pernod Ricard unloaded, they kept their luxury brands or wines that can sell. They kept their Champagne House, the Provençal Rosé. They got rid of some of the stuff that they couldn't elevate into hot. Some people I talk about importers say, look, if you find a good producers that make good wine, good value for money, there's no problem in selling it.
Yep.
Like they're getting across. It's like anything. Wine to me is just like life. You get a lot of great stuff in the middle class, but the middle class, it's just really hard. People want the cheap, or the aspirational. And it's unfortunate. I even see things on my channel. I'm trying to show people that $30 to $50, maybe up to 100, you can drink some of the greatest wines in the world. But I noticed that things get better views when it's things sensation like 100-point type wines, 95-point type wines, aspirational type wines, or the bottom bin. What's your take on that?
I think the wine industry is leveling out. I think it was really saturated with mass-produced, cheaply produced. I mean, listen, wine got super cheap to produce, and it got easier to import all over the world. And so shelves are saturated with way too many options, not only for companies, but also for consumers. So, I don't know the brands that were offloaded, and if they are independently owned, or I guess for the employees that have worked for those companies, I hope that there is a future for them. But I do think the wine industry needs to scale back. There are too many labels out there. There's too many to sift through. And I think we're finally coming to terms with the fact that not everything can be sold. Not everything wants to be sold. And not everything is going to be profitable. There are far more wine brands than there are tequila and vodka and whiskey brands. And I think we're finally starting to realize that, like, maybe we don't need all of these. Like, maybe we do have a few too many. So I think my hot take is just like, I hope that for the people that are involved in these wineries that are being offloaded, I hope that they can find their way continuing in the wine world. But I also think that this is perhaps a necessary evil to get us back to being able to sift through the wine world a little bit more easily and more comfortably and with better selections.
I think that's very well said. It's hard because the wines that you and I are going to like, not the super aspirational stuff, it's a low margin product. Farming's expensive. My father's a farmer.
Yeah.
And you just don't have the marketing budgets like spirits and beer.
Yes.
Champagne's the only thing that's close in terms of wine that has the marketing power.
Yeah.
That's
Spirits are cheaper to produce than wine. And so they have a higher margin. So that delta to market spirits is a lot higher. If you go to any of these like food and wine festivals, like, you see those dollars are way more in the spirits brands than they are in the wine brands. I mean, it's just patently obvious.
I want to ask you one last thing that's important because you're in it.
Yeah.
What do you see, and this is a fully loaded question,
Great.
What do you see in terms of the future of wine communication? Because you're kind of at the forefront of that.
We all need to work together. I think we're too separated right now. I think, the wine journalists are not getting paid what they need to be paid, but we're also like not working with the wine influencers. And I think there is a way to sort of merge the two worlds together to make sure that everyone is getting paid well and that we're also communicating to the public what we need to communicate. It's hard. Journalism's hard, and it's not unique to wine. It's in general, but we're seeing journalism move to different avenues. And as per always with the wine industry has not adopted new techniques, new ways to market. And I think wine communication is no different. So what do I think? I am very lucky to be doing what I do full time. I know that. But I also think that if we're going to continue communicating wine to consumers, then we all have to adapt or die.
It's very well said. I know that I see, like, in my space, when I started going on press trips and stuff, I started 9 years ago, kind of like you did. People were really, journalists especially, were very, they were very envious and rude about wine influencers. But now it's more integrated.
Yeah.
But then I've noticed in the last year or two, trips have kind of shifted more towards wine journalists, and some influencers got pushed out. So it's just an interesting space. But you're right.
Well, that's interesting. I've seen sort of the opposite. I'm seeing a cohesion of both, and I'm seeing more influencer trips. I'm also seeing more journalists, which is great. Really embracing social media. Matthew Kaner, who's been on this podcast, has a great social media following. Even like Kara McNeil. And she writes independently, but then she also has someone that does great social media content to support those ratings. So I think we need to see more of that. Like, I think Matthew's a great example of someone who is writing for Men's Journal, and that's also publishing on social media to show, like, hey, this is the context of what we're talking about. But if you want to learn more, this is the article to go to. And I would love to see more of that.
But I agree. I think the problem is, like, you're one of the few, like, both of us are doing this full time. That's like our livelihood. Mm-hmm. It's quite rare. Like, it's quite rare in this wine space. Usually people, it's a side job, or they're retired, or they have somebody else, like they have a spouse, which, they have a spouse that's also a second income. It's tough. It's a tough world. So it just speaks to what you were talking about, Pernod Ricard. I mean, I think we got to find a way to make wine sexy again.
I do too. I've been, as I said, I love working with Wine Access. They've been a great partner of mine for going on 6 years now. And that was really, one of the first clients that I worked with that I think really respected what I did. But it's been really fun in what I do, sort of working with other clients and then also working outside of the wine world. I'm really excited because I just got a media box from the Beef It's What's for Dinner campaign from the National Cattlemen's
That's
Association.
awesome.
And this is what I mean. Like, I think working with these like tangentially related brands where wine can be integrated into, like, that's, to me, that's key to the future of wine communication, is like, we're like stepping outside the realm of wine and bringing in other people. So stay tuned for that content because I'm super pumped.
Awesome. Well, Amanda, we put all your links to your Instagram, your TikTok in there. That you're probably most active on Instagram. That's where people can find you, right?
Right now, yeah, but you know, TikTok as well, and hopefully we'll make a reappearance on YouTube one of these days.
I hope so too. We'll do more collabs, or we'll do a few maybe live tastings together. I think that would be great.
This was super fun.
Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.